She is broken, my king. Take her sister instead. Take anyone but her. I beg you, do not stain your bloodline with a daughter who cannot even summon a wolf." The words reached Seraphine before she reached the doorway, and they struck the back of her knees like an executioner's blade. She stopped in the cold marble corridor of the Hollowmoor Palace, one hand pressed flat against a pillar of black stone, and felt something inside her chest tear loose from its moorings and begin to sink. Her own father, Lord Varec Thornwood, the man whose name she carried, the man who had once carried her on his shoulders through the autumn woods, was on his knees on the throne-room floor, his forehead bowed toward the boots of the Alpha King, offering up her sister, the way a merchant offers a lesser cut of meat to disguise the spoilage of the first. She didn't scream. That was the first mercy she gave herself. She pressed her lips together until they went white, and she held the sound inside her throat where it could not betray her. And she listened, because listening was the only power left to a woman standing outside a room in which her fate was being auctioned. "Rise, Lord Thornwood." The voice that answered was low and unhurried, a voice accustomed to being obeyed before it finished a sentence. "Alpha King Ronan Vale, sovereign of the Hollowmoor Packlands, master of 9 territories, and the silver river that fed them all." Seraphine had met him only twice, both times from a distance, both times aware of the way the air itself seemed to lean toward him. "You come into my hall and you kneel, and you tell me the woman promised to me by the old covenant is defective. You understand what you are asking me to break." "I understand, my king. But Seraphine has no wolf. She has never shifted. She never will. The healers have said it. The priestesses have said it. A mate who cannot run beside you, who cannot bear you strong heirs, who cannot stand at the head of the pack when the moon calls. She would shame you before every alpha from here to the Ashfall coast. Her sister Lysandra is everything she is not. Strong, blooded, beautiful in the eyes of the moon." There was a silence then, and in that silence, Seraphine felt the last warm thing inside her go quiet and cold, the way a hearth goes grey after the fire has been let to die. Because here was the truth her father had never said to her face, only behind the closed doors where he thought her too dull to be listening. She was defective. She was a stain. 23 winters she had lived in his house, and she had believed, foolishly the way a child believes, that his coldness was only worry, that his silences were only the burden of leadership, that somewhere beneath the disappointment there was a father who would, if the world ever came for her, stand between her and the blade. Now she knew. He was the one holding it. She did not cry, and that was the second mercy. Instead, she stood very still, and she catalogued the pain the way her old tutor had taught her to catalogue everything, precisely, without flinching. There was the ache behind her sternum, where the bond mark on her collarbone had begun to warm the moment she stepped into the palace, the faint silver crescent that had appeared on her skin the night she turned 18, the mark that told the world she was tethered to Ronan Vale, whether she willed it or not. It was pulsing now, that mark, a slow heat like a coal held too near the skin, and she understood with a strange cold clarity that this was the bond recognizing him, reaching for him, even as the men in that room bargained her away. The body is such a traitor, she thought. It wants what will not have it. "And you believe," the king said at last, "that I cannot tell the difference between what a woman is and what her father says she is. My king, get up, Thornwood. I do not speak to the tops of men's heads." She heard the scrape of her father rising, the rustle of his good cloak, the one he wore only for occasions of consequence. He had dressed to sell her. He had chosen his best clothes to give her away. "I will consider your petition," Ronan Vale said, and every word was a stone dropped into still water. The covenant binds me to the Thornwood line, not to a particular daughter of it. If the mark can be moved, if the priestesses confirm the younger is viable, then perhaps the elder can be released to whatever quiet life suits a wolfless woman. You will have my answer at the next full moon. You are generous beyond. I am nothing of the kind. Go. Seraphine moved before her father could. She did not run. Running would have made noise, and noise would have made her real to them, and she did not want to be real to them ever again. She walked backward 3 silent steps into the shadow of the pillar, then turned and glided down the corridor with her spine straight and her chin level, past the tapestries of hunts long dead, past the guttering torches, past the tall windows through which the grey afternoon poured like watered milk. And somewhere in that walk, between the throne room and the great doors, the girl who had spent 23 years trying to be enough for a father who had already decided she was not, that girl finished dying quietly, without a sound. What took her place was not yet strong. It was only certain. Certain of one thing, and one thing alone, that she would never again stand outside a door and wait to learn whether she was wanted. She reached the courtyard, and the wind off the moor touched her face, and she lifted her eyes to the pale disk of the daytime moon hanging faint and unashamed in the blue, and she made herself a promise in words so quiet they never left her lips. You threw me away before I could show you what I was. So I will show the world instead. And when you finally see me, it will be too late to call me daughter. She did not know yet how she would do it. She only knew that she would, and the bond mark on her collarbone, forgotten, kept its slow silver burning, like an ember waiting for a wind. That night, Seraphine did not weep, and she did not sleep. She sat at the narrow window of the guest chamber the palace had given her, a fine room, a courteous room, the sort of room you give a woman you intend to dispose of politely, and she watched the moon climb, and she began, with the cold, methodical patience that had always been her only true inheritance, to plan her exit, because a woman who cannot summon a wolf learns very early that she cannot rely on claws. She learns to rely on the mind instead, and Seraphine's mind, dismissed by everyone who had ever measured her by the wrong scale, was the sharpest weapon in the Hollow Moor, and no one in that palace had the faintest idea. They thought her helpless. That was the flaw in their whole design, and she intended to widen it until their world fell through. She had, over 3 quiet years, built something no one knew about. It had begun as a distraction from her loneliness, and become, without her quite intending it, an escape route. In the long, empty hours when her father paraded her sister before eligible alphas and left Seraphine to the library, she had read. Not romances, ledgers, trade agreements, the old land charters of the 9 territories, the water rights of the Silver River, the tangled genealogies of debt and favor that bound one pack to another. She had learned the true architecture of power in the Hollow Moor, which was not teeth and not the moon, but money and paper, and the slow accumulation of what people owed one another, and she had learned that the Thornwood estate, for all its proud name, was rotting from the inside. Her father had borrowed against the harvest for 6 years running, mortgaging the future to keep up the appearance of the present, and the man who held those debts was not the king at all. The man who held those debts was Lord Caldus Reeve, the king's own treasurer, a lean, grey creature with a voice like a closing drawer, and Seraphine had understood something about him the very first time she read his signature at the foot of a Thornwood loan. He was not lending to help her father. He was lending to own him. And through her father, to own a seat at the Alpha King's council, and through that seat, to own the king himself, one quiet debt at a time. She had told no one. Who would have listened to the wolfless daughter? But she had copied. Over the years, she had copied every document she could reach in her own small, precise hand, on cheap paper she bought from a travelling scribe and hid inside the false bottom of a sewing box no one would ever think to search. She had a second copy hidden in the hollow of an old oak on the estate's northern edge, wrapped in oilcloth, because her tutor, the one man in her childhood who had treated her as though her mind were a garden worth tending, had once told her that the difference between a victim and a survivor is that a survivor keeps a copy. His name had been Master Orlin Fenn, and he was old and half-blind now and lived in a cottage at the edge of the Packlands, and he was the only person alive whom Seraphine trusted. She thought of him now, in the dark, and she understood that he would be the door through which she left this life. She rose before the first light. She dressed not in the silks her father had provided, but in the plain travelling clothes she had packed and hidden a season ago, on the day she first overheard her father use the word disposal. She had known then, in the animal part of her that had no wolf but had never lacked instinct, that this day would come. She left the silks folded on the bed. She left the jewelled comb her father had given her for her 20th birthday. A bribe, she understood now, an apology paid in advance for the betrayal already forming in his heart. On the pillow beside it, its rubies catching the grey dawn like drops of someone else's blood. She took nothing that had been given to her. She took only what she had made herself, the copied ledgers, a purse of coin she had saved from the small allowance meant for ribbons, and never once spent on ribbons, and the certainty that had replaced her heart. The corridor was empty. The guards at the lesser gate were dozing at the hour when night hands over its watch today, and the kitchen door, as she had learned 3 seasons ago, was left unbarred for the milk carters. She walked out of the Hollowmoor Palace into a fog so thick the towers behind her vanished before she had counted 20 steps, and no bell rang, and no voice called her name. And that, the silence of her leaving, the perfect indifference of a place that had been about to sell her, was the loneliest and most liberating thing she had ever felt. Master Orlin's cottage stood 2 days' walk to the west, but she did not walk. At the crossroads village of Merrow, she found the wool trader Hesper, a broad, plain-faced woman who bought fleece from the Thornwood shepherds, and had once, years ago, been shown a small kindness by a shy girl who had corrected an error in Hesper's accounts and saved her from a season's loss. People remember the ones who help them when no one is watching. Hesper asked no questions. She hid Seraphine beneath the oilcloth in the back of her cart, among the raw fleeces that smelled of lanolin and rain, and she drove her west through the fog, and when Seraphine tried to press coin into her hand at the parting, Hesper closed her fingers over it, and pushed it back and said only, "You paid this already, love, 3 winters ago, and never knew it. Go on." So this is how it works, Seraphine thought, lying in the dark of the cart, with her heart cracked open, and something new and green pushing up through the crack. Every kindness is a seed. You just do not know which soil will keep it. She reached Master Orlin's cottage at dusk on the 2nd day, and the old man opened his door and peered at her with his failing eyes, and said, before she had spoken a word, "Ah." So they finally did it. And he stepped back and let her in, and he made her tea with hands that shook, and he listened to the whole of it without once telling her she was overreacting, and when she had finished he was quiet for a long time. Then he said the thing that set the rest of her life in motion. The wolfless are not weak, child. The wolfless are simply not distracted. Every wolf in these lands is ruled by the moon and the blood and the hunt, and it makes them strong, and it makes them blind. You have never had that leash. You see the whole board, while they see only the square they stand on. Your father has thrown away his cleverest asset, because he could not hear it howl. That is his tragedy. Do not let it become yours. He leaned forward, and the firelight caught the milk of his blind eyes. Now, show me these ledgers you have been so quietly copying. I taught you to read them for a reason, and I do not think it was so you could grieve. 6 months later, in the free port city of Saltmere, where no covenant reached and no pack held sway, there was a woman the merchants had begun to call the Ledger Wraith, and no one who used the name would have believed she had ever knelt to anyone. Saltmere was a city of water and stone and appetite, built where the silver river of the Hollow Moor at last poured itself into the grey sea, a place where the Packlands sold their wool and their timber and their iron, and bought back the world's spices and silks and secrets. It was ruled by no alpha and no king, but by the merchants' concord, a quarrelsome assembly of trading houses who trusted nothing but numbers. And it was, Seraphine had understood the moment she arrived, the one place in all the region where being wolfless was not a curse. Here no one asked whether you could run beneath the moon. Here they asked only whether your figures were sound. Hers were flawless. She had arrived with her copied ledgers, her small purse, and Master Orlin's last gift, a letter of introduction to a woman named Danae Corville, a shipping factor the old scholar had once tutored, decades ago, in the same library where he had later tutored Seraphine. Danae was 50, sharp as a gutting knife, and ran a modest fleet of coastal traders out of a warehouse on the Saltmere waterfront that smelled of tar and cardamom. She had read Orlin's letter, looked Seraphine up and down with eyes that missed nothing, and said, "He says you can find the lie in any account book ever kept. Prove it, or don't waste my afternoon." Seraphine had asked to see the books of Danae's least profitable route. She had read them in an hour. Then she had laid one finger on a line near the bottom of the 3rd page and said quietly, "Your factor at the Ashford depot has been skimming the salt duty for 2 years. Not much, a little each month, small enough to hide in the tide loss column. But salt does not evaporate at the rate this ledger claims. He is stealing from you at the exact speed he believes you are too busy to notice." Danae had gone very still. Then she had laughed, a short bark of pure delight, and poured 2 cups of a wine so good Seraphine had never tasted its equal, and said, "You start Monday, and whatever they paid you where you came from, forget it. Here you'll be paid what you're worth, which I suspect is going to frighten us both." That had been 6 months ago. In 6 months, Seraphine, who had taken a new name in Saltmere, Seraphine Ashgrove, burying the thornwood like a body she was glad to be rid of, had risen from Danae's ledger reader to Danae's partner in all but the last signature. She had found 3 more thieves, unravelled a smuggling ring that had been bleeding the Concord for a decade, and turned Danae's modest fleet into the most trusted clearing-house on the whole Silver River. Captains who would not let another soul touch their manifests brought them to her. Trading houses that had spent generations lying to one another began, warily, to rout their disputes through the quiet, grey-eyed woman who never raised her voice and never forgot a number, and never, ever, could be flattered or frightened into seeing a figure that was not there. She had built, in half a year, something her father's whole name and rank had never given her. She had built respect, that no one could take back, because no one had granted it. She had earned it, every ounce. And she had changed. The woman who walked the Saltmere waterfront, now in a coat of good dark wool, her hair bound simply, a leather folio of accounts beneath her arm, did not walk with her chin lifted in defiance. She no longer needed defiance, because she no longer expected an attack. She walked like a woman who knew precisely how much room she was entitled to, and took exactly that much, no less. The phantom heat of the bond mark still woke sometimes in the night, still burned faint and silver against her collarbone, and she had learned to lie in the dark and let it burn, and feel nothing but a distant clinical curiosity, the way one might regard an old scar that aches before rain. That is only the body, she would tell herself. The body wants what will not have it. The mind knows better. And she would rise in the morning and go to her ledgers and forget it until the next full moon pulled it out of her again. She did not seek revenge. This surprised the few people who knew her story. Danae, to whom she had told all of it one late night over the good wine, had expected a woman consumed. But Seraphine had learned something in Master Orlin's cottage and refined it across 6 months of numbers. Revenge sought is revenge that controls you. She would not chase her father's ruin. She did not need to. She had read his ledgers. She knew to the season when the rot in the Thornwood accounts would finally break through the floorboards. She had only to keep building, keep rising, keep becoming, and let the arithmetic of his own choices carry him down. The gallows he was building for himself required no help from her. She had merely, long ago, taken careful note of the lumber. Still, the news came to her, as news of the Packlands always came to Saltmere, on the tongues of captains and the pages of manifests, and the news that autumn was strange. The hollow moor was faltering. The Silver River trade, the lifeblood of the Alpha King's power, had begun to seize and stutter. Cargoes delayed, duties uncollected, whole shipments of iron and timber vanishing between the Packlands and the port. The Concord grumbled. Prices climbed. And beneath the surface of it, in the quiet way Seraphine had trained herself to read, she saw a pattern that made the old cold clarity rise in her like river fog. This was not accident. This was not mismanagement. Someone inside the hollow moor was strangling the king's own trade, slowly, deliberately, in a way designed to look like decline rather than sabotage. Someone was doing to the whole kingdom exactly what Lord Caldus Reeve had done, loan by loan, to her father. She spread her copied Thornwood ledgers across her table one night and set beside them the shipping manifests of the failing river trade, and she read them together the way Orlin had taught her, and by dawn she understood. Reeve was not merely bleeding the Thornwoods. He was bleeding the crown. Every debt he held, every delayed cargo, every duty diverted, was a thread, and all the threads ran to the same lean grey hand, and that hand was slowly, patiently, closing around the throat of the Alpha King himself. Ronan Vale, master of 9 territories, did not yet know he was already, quietly, someone else's property. Seraphine sat back in the grey light and felt something she had not expected to feel. Not triumph, not even satisfaction. She felt the strange vertigo of a woman who has been handed, unasked, the power to save the very man who let her father sell her, and the equal power to simply close her folio, say nothing, and watch him drown. I owe him nothing, she thought. He agreed to trade me away. He never even had the courage to look at me and say no. I will not treat a woman like livestock. He said, I will consider it. And she remembered the slow heat of the bond mark reaching for him across a room while he weighed her worth, and the memory made her jaw tighten. And yet, she looked at the manifests, at the pattern that only she in all the world had bothered to read, and she understood that this was no longer about a discarded daughter and a cold father. This was about who would truly rule the Silver River when the strangling was done. And Caldus Reeve, she knew from his own figures, was a far colder thing than any Alpha King. A man who owned the crown from the shadows would answer to no covenant and no counsel and no mercy at all. The wolfless of the hollow moor, the low-born, the powerless, the girls whose fathers found them inconvenient. Every one of them would be worse off under Reeve's quiet accounting than they had ever been under Vale's careless one. So the question was not whether she wanted to save Ronan Vale. She did not, particularly. The question was what kind of woman she intended to be, now that she had finally become one no one could command. She closed the folio. She did not decide that night. But she began, quietly, to prepare, because whatever she chose, she intended to choose it from a position of such total strength that the choosing itself would be the reversal. She would not run to the palace with a warning like a servant. If Ronan Vale wanted what she knew, he would come to her, on her ground, in her city, and he would ask. She did not yet know how right she was. The Alpha King came to Saltmere before the winter, and he did not come as a king. He came as the powerful always come when their power has begun to rot beneath them, in disguise and in desperation, with a small hard entourage and a false name, because the great trading houses of the Concord had begun to refuse his credit, and a sovereign who cannot borrow is a sovereign whose secret is already halfway told. The Silver River had all but stopped. 3 of his 9 territories were in open grumbling. His treasury, which he had trusted to Lord Caldus Reeve for 11 years, turned out to contain far less than the ledgers claimed, and when Ronan Vale had finally demanded a full accounting, the ledgers themselves had proven to be a labyrinth built specifically so that no one but their architect could walk them. He had come to Saltmere because Saltmere was where the truth of money lived, and because someone, a wool trader named Hesper, of all the unlikely souls, who had heard the king's men asking desperate questions in a moor side inn, had told his steward that there was one person on the whole Silver River who could read any account book ever kept. The Ledger Wraith, they called her. The steward had sought her through Danai Corvell's house, and Danai, who knew exactly whose father had once knelt on a throne-room floor, had come to Seraphine with the request and a raised eyebrow and said, "A man calling himself a merchant from the interior wants to hire your eyes for a matter of great delicacy and greater coin. He would not give his name. His boots cost more than his story. I think you know who he is. Do you want me to send him away?" And Seraphine had sat with it for a long moment, the folio of her whole quiet vengeance closed on the desk before her, and she had said, "No, send him in. But send him to the counting room, not the parlour. And Danai, do not tell him my name. Let him discover it." So it was that on a grey afternoon, with the sea fog pressing against the tall windows of the Corvell counting house, the Alpha King, Ronan Vale, was shown into a long room lined with ledgers, where a woman sat with her back to the door at the head of a table strewn with the manifests of his own failing kingdom, and did not rise and did not turn. "They tell me," he said, and his voice was exactly as she remembered it, low and accustomed to obedience, though there was a fray in it now, a hairline crack she could hear because she had learned to hear such things. "That you are the finest reader of accounts on the Silver River. I have a matter that requires discretion and skill in equal measure. I will pay whatever you ask." Seraphine let the silence stretch. She had waited 6 months and 23 years for this silence, and she intended to taste it. "I know what your matter is," she said at last, still not turning. "Your trade is dying. Your treasury is a lie built by a clever man, and you have finally begun to suspect that the clever man is your own treasurer, Caldus Reeve, though you cannot prove it, because every proof you might use is written in a hand you cannot read." She heard his sharp, indrawn breath. "Sit down, merchant. You are wasting the fog." He sat. She could hear the wariness in it, the animal recalculation of a predator who has walked into a room and found it already occupied by something he cannot smell. "You know a great deal for a stranger." "I am not a stranger." And now she turned. She watched it happen. She watched the Alpha King's face as recognition climbed it like frost climbing a window. Slow, then all at once. She watched his eyes widen, watched the color leave beneath the weathered brown of his skin, watched his lips part around a word he could not immediately find, and she sat perfectly still and let him find it, because she had earned the right to be looked at, finally, fully, by a man who had once agreed to weigh her worth and trade her away. "Seraphine," he breathed. "Thornwood." "Ashgrove," she corrected, gently, the way one corrects a child. "The Thornwoods sold their eldest daughter for a lighter debt and a stronger heir. I did not care to keep the name of a house that would do such a thing. But you remember the transaction. I am gratified. I was under the impression I had been forgettable. The bond mark on her collarbone, hidden beneath the high collar of her coat, had flared to life the instant he entered the room, a silver heat she had felt 3 rooms away and mastered before he ever crossed the threshold. She did not let it into her face. Let him feel it. Let it burn him. She had learned to carry the fire. She suspected he had not. "I did not," he began, and stopped, and she watched the king in him try to reassert itself and fail, because there is no royal register for a man face to face with a woman he allowed to be treated as spoiled goods. "Your father came to me. I told him I would consider it. You never said no." She said it without heat, which was worse, and she saw it land. "That is the whole of it, Your Majesty. You didn't do it. You merely declined to prevent it. You sat on your throne and let a man kneel before you and offer up his daughter like a lame horse. And your answer was that you would think about which horse you preferred. You have thought yourself a decent man for that, I imagine, in the months since. You told yourself you were reasonable, measured." She let her gaze rest on him, cool and complete. "I have spent those same months learning exactly how measured you were. And now the moon has turned the board, and you have walked, in disguise and desperate, into the counting room of the very woman you could not be troubled to defend. Tell me, do you believe in justice, or only in convenience?" He did not answer at once, and to his small credit, she noted it the way she noted everything, precisely, without letting it move her. He did not bluster, did not command, did not reach for the reflex of rank. He looked at her, and something in his face was not calculation, and was not fear, but was, she thought, the beginning of a grief he did not yet have the words for. "I did not know you were like this," he said quietly. "No," Seraphine agreed. "You did not trouble to find out. That was rather the point." Ronan Vale sat in the long grey counting room and looked at the woman he had almost thrown away, and for the first time in 11 years of rule, the Alpha King did not know what to say. He had come to Saltmere braced for humiliation of one kind, the humiliation of a sovereign begging strangers to save his kingdom. He had not been braced for this, the far deeper humiliation of discovering that the salvation he needed lived inside the very person his cowardice had cast off. He looked at her steady grey eyes and her folded hands and the way she held the whole ruin of his reign in the calm of her posture, and he understood, slowly, sickeningly, the size of what he had done. Not because she raged at him, because she did not. A woman who screamed could be dismissed as hysterical. A woman this composed, this competent, this obviously superior to every adviser who had flattered him into blindness, she could only be reckoned with. "How much do you know," he said finally, "about Reeve?" "Everything." She opened the folio then, unhurried, and turned it to face him, and spread across the table the copied Thornwood ledgers beside the failing river manifests, and she began to teach him the shape of his own destruction the way Master Orlin had once taught her. Simply, patiently, sparing nothing. 11 years ago, your treasurer began lending to the great houses of your realm. Small loans, generous terms. My father was one of the first. By the 3rd year, he owed Reeve more than the Thornwood estate could yield in a decade, and so my father would vote in your council exactly as Reeve wished, or be ruined. Multiply that by every indebted lord on your list. Reeve did not need your throne. He needed the men who surround it, and he bought them one desperate signature at a time. And you never noticed, because you are an alpha, and alphas count teeth, not coin. She turned a page. 2 years ago he moved from your lords to your lifeblood. The river trade? Watch. Her finger traced the manifests, cargo by cargo, delay by delay, duty by diverted duty. Every stoppage flows to a factor Reeve owns. Every loss reappears in an account you have never been shown. He is not stealing your money, your majesty. He is stealing your solvency, so that when the crown can no longer pay its own guard, its own priests, its own granaries, there will be exactly one man in the Hollow Moor with the gold to keep it standing, and you will hand him whatever he asks, gratefully, and call it rescue. He means to own you the way he owns my father. And unlike my father, you have no one left who can read the trap, because you sent away the only person who was ever quietly reading it. The king was silent for a long moment. The fog moved against the windows. Somewhere below, a ship's bell rang. "Why do you have these?" he said at last, very low. "These are my treasurer's private accounts. How does a wolfless daughter of a minor house come to hold the secret ledgers of the crown?" And here Seraphine allowed herself the first true edge of her satisfaction, thin and bright as a filleting knife. "Because your whole world spent 23 years deciding I was too weak to matter, and so no one ever thought to keep a secret from me. I was furniture, your majesty, furniture that could read. I sat in my father's study while Reeve's couriers came and went, and I copied everything, because a man who taught me long ago told me that the difference between a victim and a survivor is that a survivor keeps a copy." She closed the folio. "You did not lose to Reeve because he is strong. You lost because you cannot imagine that the powerless are watching. He knows better. He counts on it. And so do I." Ronan Vale rose from the table then, and walked to the window and stood with his back to her, and she watched the broad line of his shoulders and understood that he was, at last, afraid. Not of Reeve, but of the sum of himself. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, had shed the last of its royal armor, and what was left underneath was rawer and more human than she had expected, and she distrusted it, precisely because she hadn't expected it. "I need your help," he said. "I know I have no right to it. I know what I let happen to you. But I am not asking for me. There are 40,000 souls in the Hollow Moor who will belong to Caldus Reeve within the year if this trap closes, and Reeve is a colder master than I have ever been. I am asking you to help me save them. Name your price. Land, title, gold, a seat on the council, anything within a king's power to give, I will give it." Seraphine looked at his back for a long moment, and she felt the old cold clarity settle over her like a familiar coat. "You misunderstand your position," she said. "You are speaking as though you have something I want. You do not. I have wealth, Your Majesty. I have respect that no one granted me, and no one can take back. I have a life in a city where no man may kneel and offer me to another. Everything you could give me, I have already built for myself, out of the very talents your world threw away. So let us be clear about who is asking whom for what." She rose, and though she was a head shorter than he, when he turned at the sound of her rising, he found himself, unmistakably, looking up. "You have not come to hire me. You have come to beg me, and I have not yet decided whether the man who let my father kneel is worth the saving. So sit down, and this time, when a thornwood stands before your judgment, you will do the standing." He sat. She did not gloat. That was the discipline of it, the thing Danae had marveled at, and Orlin had predicted. She took no visible pleasure in the reversal, and its absence made it more total than any triumph could have been. She simply resumed her seat and folded her hands, and let him understand, in the long quiet, exactly how it felt to have your fate weighed by someone who owed you nothing. "I will consider your petition," she said at last, and she watched his own words, returned to him after half a year, strike him like a slap. "You will have my answer when I have satisfied myself of two things. First, that you are capable of learning what you clearly never bothered to learn, the difference between a person's worth and their pedigree. And second, that saving your kingdom is worth the price I will actually ask, which is not land and is not gold." She let the silence hold. "It is a change I intend to make to your covenant, but we will come to that. For now, tell me everything Reeve has done in the last month, and leave out nothing, because the man is 3 moves ahead of you, and I intend to be 4 ahead of him." They worked through the fog and into the dark, and somewhere in those hours, bent together over the ledgers that held the fate of 40,000 souls, the Alpha King began. Too late, and knowing it was too late, which is its own particular torment, to see the woman his cowardice had refused to look at, and to understand precisely what he had once agreed to give away. For 3 weeks, Seraphine took the Alpha King apart and rebuilt him into a weapon he did not know he could be. She did it not out of mercy and not yet out of forgiveness, but out of arithmetic, because saving the Hollowmoor from Caldus Reeve required a king who could think in coin and paper rather than teeth and moonlight, and Ronan Vale, whatever else he was, proved a faster study than his 11 idle years had suggested. She met him each day in the Corvell counting house, and she taught him to read his own kingdom the way she read it, and she watched him pass through the stages she had watched her own students pass through: disbelief, resistance, the sullen resentment of a proud man made to feel stupid, and finally, if he was worth anything, the clean, cold thrill of actually understanding. He was worth something. She noted it and did not let it soften her. Meanwhile, she moved the pieces. She had spent 6 months making herself indispensable to the Merchants' Concord, and now she spent that indispensability like the currency it was. Quietly, through Danae and through a dozen captains who trusted her figures above their own, she began to close the river trade to Reeve's factors. Not by decree, which she had no power to issue, but by information, which she had power in abundance. She showed 3 great trading houses precisely how Reeve's men had been skimming their salt duties for years, and the houses, enraged, blacklisted those factors overnight. She revealed to the Concord's harbour master the pattern of the vanishing cargoes, and the harbour master, who answered to no king and hated to be made a fool, seized 2 of Reeve's ships on charges of manifest fraud. Thread by thread, in the space of 3 weeks, the net Reeve had spent 2 years weaving began to be unwoven, and the beauty of it, the thing that made Seraphine's spare, cold smile flicker to life in the privacy of her own rooms, was that Reeve could not tell it was happening on purpose. It looked, from the inside, exactly like bad luck, like the ordinary friction of trade, like decline. She was doing to him precisely what he had done to everyone else, strangling him so slowly he would mistake it for weather. But she knew he would eventually feel the hand at his throat, and she knew what such men did when they felt it. They stopped being subtle, and a man like Reeve, cornered, would reach for the one crude lever he had always held in reserve. He reached for it on the night of the new moon. Word came to Saltmere by fast courier, the horse half dead, and the rider grey with cold. Lord Caldus Reeve, sensing the king's prolonged and unexplained absence, had moved. He had called an emergency session of the Hollowmoor Council, and before the assembled lords, most of whom owed him their votes, he had declared that the Alpha King had abandoned his throne in a time of crisis, had vanished without regency or word, and that the safety of the realm demanded a steward be appointed to hold the crown's authority until the king returned or was confirmed dead. He had, of course, a candidate in mind, and to bind the arrangement in the old law that even the Pax still feared, he had produced the sister, Lysandra Thornwood, the stronger daughter, the blooded one. Reeve had arranged, on the king's own supposed authority, for Lysandra to be brought forward as the crown's intended mate under the old covenant, so that when Ronan Vale failed to return, she would stand as the bereaved royal consort, and Reeve, as her father's creditor and her sponsor, would rule the Hollowmoor, through her, the way he had always intended to rule it through the Thornwoods. Her father, Seraphine learned, had signed it gladly, had wept with gratitude, had at last gotten the thing he wanted, his family bound to the throne, his lesser daughter forgotten, his debts, he imagined, forgiven in exchange. He did not understand, even now, that he had merely handed Reeve the last rope. He never understood anything. That was his tragedy, as Orlin had said, and Seraphine had long since stopped waiting for it to become hers. She read the courier's report by candlelight while Ronan Vale read it over her shoulder, and she felt him go rigid with fury, felt the growl gather in his chest, felt the alpha in him rise up, wanting to run home and tear Reeve's throat out beneath the dark of the moon. And she set down the paper and turned to him and said the most important thing she would say to him in the whole of that long, strange season. If you go back now, as a king, in a rage, you will lose. You will arrive to find a council that has legally declared you a deserter, a treasurer who has the votes to depose you, and a covenant bride who makes your absence permanent. You will have to fight your way to your own throne, and even if you win, you will rule over a kingdom that watched you claw and howl and prove yourself exactly the beast Reeve has told them you are. That is the story he has written for you. Do not perform it. She held his gaze until the growl subsided. We do not go back as king and beggar. We go back as arithmetic. And we do not go to your council. We go to your covenant. What do you mean? he said low. I mean, said Seraphine. And now the thing she had been building toward for 3 weeks and 6 months and 23 years finally came into view, that Reeve's entire play rests on the old covenant, on the legal fact that the crown is bound to the Thornwood line, and that with the elder daughter gone, the younger inherits the bond. That is the ground he is standing on. And it happens that I know more about the old covenant than any priestess in the Hollowmoor, because I spent my whole invisible girlhood reading it, while everyone assumed I was too dull to understand. The bond, Your Majesty, is not to the Thornwood house. It never was. The covenant binds the crown to a specific bearer of a specific mark, the mark that appears at the coming of age, on the true intended, and on no one else. It cannot be moved. It cannot be inherited. It cannot be reassigned by a grateful father, or a scheming treasurer, or even by a king. She reached up, slowly, and unfastened the high collar of her coat, and drew it aside, and showed him, for the first time, the silver crescent that had burned against her collarbone from the moment he entered her city. The bond is mine. It was always mine. Lysandra bears no mark and never will, because the covenant did not choose her, and no ceremony on earth can make it, which means the entire legal foundation of Reeve's coup rests on a bride the old law will not recognize. He has built his gallows, Your Majesty, and I hold the only rope that fits it. Ronan Vale stared at the silver mark on her skin, and then up at her face, and she watched the last of his kingly composure fall away, and beneath it was something she had not permitted herself to imagine. Not gratitude, not calculation, but a grief so bare it was almost unbearable to witness. The mark was his. He had felt it too all these weeks, the answering fire beneath his own ribs that he had told himself was tension, was shame, was anything but what it was. The covenant had chosen this woman for him, this brilliant, discarded, unbreakable woman, and he had sat on his throne and agreed to consider trading her for a stronger horse. It was you, he said, horse, all along. The mark was you. The mark was me, Seraphine agreed, and you let my father offer to have it carved off and given to my sister like a title deed. She refastened her collar with steady hands. So here is my price, Your Majesty, the price for saving your kingdom from Keldus Reeve. You will not marry me. Understand that first, and completely. Whatever the moon decided about our bodies, I will not be commanded by a bond into the arms of a man who weighed me and found me wanting. My price is this. We return to the Hollowmoor together, and before your whole council, I will unmake Reeve with his own ledgers and the old law both. And in exchange, you will do the one thing you failed to do the day my father knelt. You will stand up. You will use the covenant not to claim a bride, but to abolish the practice of binding women to thrones against their will, forever, for every daughter after me. That is what I want. Not your hand, your law. Give me that, and I will hand you back your kingdom. Refuse it, and I will let Reeve have you, and build my ships, and never think of the Hollowmoor again. The king was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, in the counting house of the woman he had almost thrown away, the Alpha King, Ronan Vale, knelt. Not in petition this time, but in something closer to penance, and said, "Teach me how to stand. I will do the rest." They returned to the Hollowmoor on the last day before the full moon, and the palace of black stone that had once auctioned Seraphine in silence now opened its gates to her in confusion, because no one knew what to make of the wolfless daughter who rode in, beside a king they had been told was gone. Reeve had moved fast in the king's absence, but Seraphine had moved faster, and the difference between them was that Reeve believed the world was a thing you seized, while Seraphine knew it was a thing you understood. She had sent word ahead, not to the king's loyalists, who were few and frightened, but to the merchants' concord and to every trading house on the Silver River, informing them, with documentary proof, that the man attempting to seize the Hollowmoor crown was the same man who had been defrauding their salt duties and seizing their cargoes for a decade. By the time she rode through the palace gates, Reeve's coup had a problem he had not anticipated. The port that fed the kingdom had declared it would recognize no steward and honor no crown that Caldus Reeve stood behind, and a landlocked king rules nothing at all. The council chamber was a vast, round room beneath a domed ceiling painted with the hunts of dead alphas, and when Seraphine entered it at Ronan Vale's side, it was full of lords who had come expecting to confirm a stewardship, and who now turned in a rustle of shock at the sight of the king they had declared a deserter, alive, unhurried, and accompanied by a woman half of them dimly recognized, and none could place. At the head of the table stood Caldus Reeve, lean and grey, and beside him, in the fine gown of a bride-in-waiting, stood Lysandra Thornwood, beautiful and blooded and utterly out of her depth. And kneeling near them, in his best cloak, the cloak he had worn to sell his daughter, was Lord Varick Thornwood, who looked up as Seraphine entered, and went white to the lips, because the last time he had seen this daughter, she had been a shamed and silent thing, and the woman walking toward him now moved like the owner of every room she had ever been made to wait outside. "You," her father breathed, "you are supposed to be—" "Gone?" Seraphine said gently. "Yes. That was rather your intention, wasn't it, father?" She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The whole chamber had gone silent to hear her. "Please, kneel if it comforts you. You seem to do it so easily." Reeve recovered first, because men like Reeve always recover first. It is their one talent. "Your Majesty," he said smoothly, turning to the king, "I rejoice to see you returned, though I confess I am at a loss. This council convened only because you vanished without word in the realm's darkest hour, and I do not know this woman you have brought, though she wears a merchant's coat and a Thornwood's face." "You know her," Ronan Vale said, and his voice was quiet and level and carried to every corner of the dome. "You have known her longer than I have. You simply never bothered to look, because you count teeth, Reeve, not minds. Allow me to correct the oversight. This is Seraphine, true daughter of the old covenant, bearer of the crown's bond, and the finest reader of accounts on the Silver River. And she has read yours." He stepped aside, and Seraphine took the floor. She did not perform. That was the terror of her. She laid the ledgers on the great council table, one by one, and she walked the lords of the Hollowmoor through 11 years of Caldus Reeve's patient theft, the way a physician walks a family through the progress of a disease, calmly, precisely, sparing no one. She showed them the loans that had turned lords into puppets. She named the men in that very room who had voted as Reeve dictated, because Reeve held their debts, and she watched them flush and look at their hands, and she said, not unkindly, "I do not blame you. He is very good. He counted on the fact that no one would ever check. I checked." She showed them the diverted duties, the vanishing cargoes, the phantom treasury. She showed them at last the plan entire, the strangling of the trade, the manufactured crisis, the stewardship, the covenant bride, the slow closing of the grey hand around the throat of the crown, and then she set down the final page and looked up, and the chamber was so silent she could hear the torches breathe. "And now the law," she said, "because Lord Reeve has built his whole seizure upon the old covenant, upon the claim that with the elder Thornwood daughter absent, the crown's bond passes to the younger, making Lysandra the royal consort, and Reeve, as her sponsor and creditor, the true power behind a hollow throne." She turned to the priestesses, seated along the chamber's edge, ancient women in grey, who kept the covenant law. "You know the old text better than I do, and yet I have read it more recently than any of you, because I had nothing else to do with a girlhood no one valued. So correct me if I err. The bond of the covenant attaches to the bearer of the mark, which appears at the coming of age upon the true intended, and upon no one else. It cannot be moved. It cannot be inherited. It cannot be reassigned by a father's petition, or a treasurer's scheme, or a king's command. Is this the law, or is it not?" The eldest priestess rose, slowly, her grey robes whispering, and she looked at Seraphine for a long moment, and something passed over her creased face that might have been respect, and might have been shame at her own long silence. "It is the law," she said. "The mark cannot be moved. It has always been so." "Then let the mark be seen." And Seraphine unfastened her collar before the whole council of the Hollow Moor and drew it aside, and the silver crescent on her collarbone flared to life in the torchlight, unmistakable, undeniable, answering the identical fire that every soul in that room could feel rising from the Alpha King where he stood. A gasp moved through the chamber, like wind through wheat. "This is the bond. It has been mine since I was 18. My sister bears no such mark and never will, because the covenant did not choose her, and no ceremony, no signature, no coup can make the old law lie." She turned her cool gaze upon Reeve, and for the first time she let him see the edge of it. "Which means your steward bride is no bride at all. Your entire seizure rests upon a marriage the covenant will not recognize, sponsored by a father who owns nothing but debt, arranged by a treasurer. The port of Saltmere has already declared an outlaw for fraud. You have built a gallows, my lord. I merely brought the rope that fits it, and it fits your neck, not the king's." Reeve's smooth grey composure finally cracked, and beneath it was the cornered thing she had always known was there. He turned to the lords whose votes he owned and opened his mouth to command them, and Seraphine watched the command die, because a man cannot call in debts that the entire Silver River has just watched be exposed as theft. One by one the indebted lords, freed by the very daylight she had let in, looked away from him. His votes evaporated in the space of a breath. His ships were seized, his factors blacklisted, his loans revealed as crimes, his covenant bride unmasked as a fiction, and his king alive and standing at the head of the room with the truth on his side for the first time in 11 years. "Take him," said Ronan Vale quietly, and the guards who had once been Reeve's took him instead, and the lean grey creature who had spent a decade owning men from the shadows was led from the chamber into the daylight he had always avoided, and he did not struggle, because men who live by leverage know, better than anyone, the exact moment the leverage is gone. Lysandra Thornwood fled the room in tears, her borrowed crown of a future crumbling, and Seraphine did not chase her, because her sister had been a decoration and a pawn, and not truly an author of any of it. And her father sank the rest of the way to the floor and reached toward her and said, "Seraphine, daughter, you have saved us. You have saved the family. Surely now, surely you see, we can begin again." She looked down at him, kneeling there in the cloak he had worn to sell her, and she felt, at last, not hatred and not triumph, but a vast and final quiet, the quiet of a debt that has been paid in full and closed forever. "I did not save the family," she said. "I saved 40,000 souls who did nothing to deserve Reeve, and I did it because I chose to, not because I owed it. You are not among the reasons, Father. You will keep your name and your ruined estate, because I am not cruel, and your debts will be forgiven by the crown, because they were crimes committed against you as much as by you. But you will never again call me daughter, because you traded that word away on a throne-room floor, and I heard you do it, and some words, once spent, cannot be bought back. Rise if you wish. I will not be here to see it." And she turned from him, and that was the last power he ever held over her, the power to be turned from, and she felt it leave her hands like water. The Alpha King kept his price. Before the same council, that very hour, Ronan Vale abolished the binding clause of the Old Covenant, declaring that no daughter of any house would ever again be tethered to a throne against her will, that the bond might be honored only where it was freely chosen by both who bore it, and that a mark upon the skin would never again outweigh the word of the woman who wore it. He signed it with Seraphine standing beside him, not as his bride, but as its author, and the priestesses witnessed it, and it was done. He asked her once, quietly, after the chamber had emptied and the torches burned low, whether the freedom she had won might one day become a choice she would make toward him, instead of away. And Seraphine, who felt the silver bond burn between them still, looked at the man who had learned too late to stand, and she did not say never, and she did not say yes. She said, "Choice takes time, Your Majesty. I have only just been given mine. Let me hold it a while before I decide where to spend it. You will find I am worth waiting for. But you will do the waiting, this time, all of it." And he bowed his head, and for once a king was glad to be commanded. She went back to Saltmere in the spring, to her ledgers and her ships, and the life she had built with her own unvalued hands, and the Hollow Moor learned to send its trade through the woman it had once thrown away. Whether she ever returned to the man whose bond still burned in her is a story for another moon. What matters is that she left as she had come, on her own terms, owing no one, commanded by nothing. Because worth is never granted by those in power. It is proven in the dark when no one is watching, and reclaimed in the daylight on your own terms, and once you have built it with your own hands, no father and no king can ever auction it again. If this story moved something in you, take a breath and let it settle. Then do one small thing before you go. Give it a like, so more people who need this reminder can find it. Share it with someone who has ever been made to feel like the lesser choice, because they deserve to hear that their worth was never up for sale. Subscribe and join a community that believes the discarded ones rise the highest. And tell me in the comments when Seraphine turned from her father's kneeling and refused to be brought back. Did you cheer, or did you cry? I read every answer, and I would love to know which moment was yours.